To prep or not to prep? Pandemic, famine, and war. I had a rude awakening and a painful realization that the predicted food shortages and famine is a very real and possible threat. If, like me, you have not been paying attention to the writing on the walls, then I suggest you grab a very strong cup of coffee, so strong that it will not show up in your blood tests. And I will tell you, in spite of living in the Netherlands and the country of milk and honey in Europe and probably the world, why I am seriously considering prepping and how and why I will approach this within the European context. Let's get prepping. When a Canadian professor in psychology with a loyal following of more than 5 million people and more than 400 million views on his videos, does an interview with an American war veteran and combat correspondent, I sit up straight in my chair. And when a doctor in education from the United Kingdom with a loyal following of more than 2 million subscribers to his channels and more than 500 million views publishes a video, Famine 2022, I not only sit up straight in my chair, but I start paying attention. Of course, I'm referring to an interview between Dr. Jordan Peterson and Michael Yeo, as well as Dr. John Campbell. Both those two videos and 3 others will be linked down below in the description. In the more than an hour interview between Jordan Peterson and Michael Yeo, numerous references are made to the Netherlands, where I reside, which struck me like a ton of bricks, why the Netherlands is such an important geopolitical space within the European and global framework, and also the situation we have with the farmers in the Netherlands, why that is so important to the political environment in the Netherlands, as well as the global food supply and predicted food shortages and famine. In the facts mentioned by Dr. Campbell, it is very obvious, as the mainstream media has already been telling us for the last few months, that more than 30% of the world's wheat production comes from the Ukraine, more than 60% of the world's sunflower production comes from the Ukraine or Russia, and a majority, if not all or the most of the fertilizers used in the farming industry also comes from Russia. Added to this that the Ukraine supplies or feeds more than 400 individuals globally, directly or indirectly, and also adding on top of this the global supply chain issues that has been created coming out of the worldwide lockdowns the last 2 years, as well as the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This just becomes an exponential problem with the predicted food shortages and famine predicted. I must confess that when the conflict between Ukraine and Russia started, I was also glued to my seat in front of the television. But after a week, I decided that the propaganda from both sides of the conflict, as well as the mainstream media, it is becoming difficult to decide what to believe and what not. So I must confess that for the last few months, I have not been paying close attention to the developments in the Ukraine and Russia conflict crisis. Why I'm making this confession and why I think it's important to make this confession is that since the conflict started, we have been inundated with the images from the conflict in the Ukraine and Russia, as well as the predictions that are being made about the food shortages and the impending famine. Because I have not been paying attention to the news in this respect, I have not become desensitized to this reality and this repetition of the facts. When I saw the videos the last few days, it hit me like a ton of bricks, how real and how possible these very dark predictions may very well be and might very well play out in the next few months or year or longer to follow. So, what to do then? Probably plan for the inevitability or the doomsday scenario that is being predicted, and that is the food shortage or the impending famine. So I guess that leaves me to say and confess that I am now officially becoming a prepper. When I first realized that I am considering becoming a prepper and how and why I will approach this, I just had to sit and have a good laugh. I had to have a good laugh about the silliness of this idea, the images of Hollywood, the Hollywood movies, the typical American doomsday prepper we all are familiar with. But then I also remembered the words of a very famous person, and I will be paraphrasing: plan for the things that are difficult when it is easy. So I also realized that we as humans prep in our everyday existence. We prep our clothes for the next day going to work. We prep our food for the next day when we go to work. We prep for the uneventuality of life or disease or medical insurance or life insurance policies. So it is inherently part of us, evolutionary as well, to prep for unseen circumstances and eventualities. So the idea of prepping, apart from the Hollywood image, is a laughing matter and also not really a laughing matter. So once we are finished laughing at this whole silliness of prepping and the silliness at this moment in the world, then the next step would be to go over into action and let's start prepping. So within the context of the European style where I currently find myself, since I will not be planning for the uneventuality of a nuclear war or a nuclear disaster, although that is a very real possibility given the political conditions in the world at the moment. If that happens, then we are all doomed. Because I will not be prepping for a war, although that is also a very real and true possibility that it might spill over into neighboring countries. Again, if that happens, we are all doomed. And also, considering the nuclear and the war disasters mentioned, I do not anticipate and will not be planning for a total loss of infrastructure, water, electricity, gas, and normal services. The only thing left to consider for this whole prepping idea, again, it doesn't become such a laughing matter then, is only to focus on preparing and prepping for food and the impending food shortages and famine that is being predicted. Because it doesn't have to be very complicated, and this isn't brain surgery, I have divided these prepping ideas or my prepping strategy under 5 different headings or topics. Let's get prepping. Number 1, dried foodstuffs. Number 2, canned foodstuffs. Number 3, liquids. Number 4, survival food or special foods. And number 5, refrigerated or frozen foods. I'm also discussing these 5 points in the order that I think is the most important, number 1 to number 5, which would be the least important way that I will be approaching the food prepping scenario. Under the dried foodstuffs, there you will be looking at sun-dried foodstuffs, air-dried, heat-dried or heat-cured, freeze-dried, and those would be rice, pasta, beans, whatever else would be dry, would be sugar, salt, herbs. One should also consider dried egg powder. You can add milk powder to this list, and also what would be very important is to add and look at infant or baby food products that you would want to add to this list of dried foodstuffs. Also under the category of dried would be meats and fish, and definitely vegetables and fruit you can also purchase in a dried state. Looking at category number 2, the canned foodstuffs. Under this category, almost any food or dishes that you can imagine can be purchased in a canned, preserved state. Meat again, fish, sausages, vegetables, beans, fruit, pasta dishes, canned milk, canned butter even. So anything canned is possible. So this would also be a very good alternative and long-term preserved food stuff to put in your pantry. Number 3 on my list would be liquids. And again, since we're not planning for the doomsday scenario of nuclear or war or a total breakdown in infrastructure, it can do no harm if you have a few bottles of fresh water as a backup. But then the list of liquids would be milk, and oils would be important, and any type of sauces that you would like to stock up. Also, under this category and almost every category, always consider what would be important for young children or very young infants in the household in terms of liquids then. The fourth or special category, or the survival foods, is a very interesting category. Here one can look at the military type of foods and also mountaineering and hiking type of foods. Survival foods can be purchased on Amazon and eBay and a lot of websites. So that is a very interesting topic to also consider in your list of food preparations. Number 5 in my list, or on my list as the least important, is the refrigerated or the frozen foodstuffs. And again, because we are not planning for any breakdown of services, so electricity should be running and the fridge should also be running. Just make sure your doors are closed, that they do not run out of the house. So I think frozen foods and refrigerated foods should also be on the list. It will be a very convenient and nice alternative to the dried foods and the canned foodstuffs if we all have to go over to these stockpiled foods in our pantries one of these days. I totally hope and wish and pray that I am deluded and wrong about this whole food prepping and food shortage and famine scenario being predicted, and that a year from now I can make a video about this and we can all have a very good laugh at my expense. But given the state of the world that we have experienced the last 2 years with lockdowns, when the predictions were being made in January 2020, it was conspiracy theories and we were all laughing about how this would ever be possible, and here we are 2 years later, and now we have a threatening nuclear disaster or a third world war and predicted food shortages and famine. So forewarned is forearmed. Consider what needs to be considered, do and execute what you feel is right, and let's see how the follow-up video in 1 year's time looks like. If you find anything interesting or comment-worthy, please drop your comments, your likes or your dislikes even of this video. And if you have received any value from this video, please subscribe. See you in the next one.